Okay, so Liz has already introduced me, so I'll skip all of that and get straight down to business. Oh, can you see? Ah, yes. Okay, you can see my screen, right? It says yes, automation. Okay, so the topic of today's talk is it's about automation by artificial intelligence and how we ought to feel about that. So I'm particularly concerned by the kinds of automation which AI technology is going to make possible. Of course, automation by technology has a long history, and there's a long history of concern about the effects on humans and human society of automation, going at least as far back as the Industrial Revolution. Most of these concerns so far, I think, have been economic concerns. So once your job is automated, how are you going to feed your family, essentially? We can call this the economic problem of automation. So, of course, that's a big problem, and we're nowhere near having solved that. It might get a whole lot worse now that AI can do, or is on the brink of being able to do not just a few specialized things, but it seems to be on the verge of being able to do pretty much anything that a human can do. So we certainly have not solved the economic problem, but that's not the one I'm interested in today. So the economic problem, i.e., how are we going to afford to live if we don't have jobs or we're not required in the labor market? At least in principle, this is solvable. So one example is universal basic income. This is a proposed solution whereby people receive a certain amount of income regardless of whether they do or do not do any kind of productive labor. So this, at least in principle, would solve the economic problem. What I'm interested in is a slightly different problem. It may be a slightly more difficult one to solve. So what I'm interested in is not the automation of work in general, in the sense of automation of paid employment. What I'm interested in is the possibility that AI technology might replace us in the performance of certain kinds of work, which are not just instrumentally valuable. It's not just the kind of work we do to get a certain result or to make a living or to fill up the day. Rather, I'm interested in AIs replacing us in the pursuit of what I'm calling meaningful work. So work that is intrinsically valuable, work that we think ought to be done regardless of the consequences. I have in mind here things like research in science and philosophy, creation of art, things of this nature. So sort of deep, important human work, which we seem to think is not only instrumentally valuable, but intrinsically valuable. So my concern is about how AI might affect human performance of these kinds of intrinsically valuable or meaningful forms of work. Okay, oops, gonna have to move this. There we go. Okay, so this is sort of a quick snapshot of what is quite a lengthy paper at this point. I'll link to the paper at the end in case you're interested in looking at the longer version, but this is going to be a sort of quick and dirty presentation of the main ideas. So the structure is like this in three parts. So the first part, I'm going to look at, essentially I'm making predictions. I'm going to look at some possible threats which AI and total automation might have, bad ways in which they might affect human beings and individual human lives. So what I have in mind here are loss of incentives to do the kinds of meaningful work I've been briefly speaking about, the possibility that as a result of loss of motivation to perform this meaningful work, people will become de-skilled, i.e. they will lose particularly important human skills, and the possibility that if we do in fact lose these important skills like critical thinking, rationality, creativity, this might lock us into a worse future than we would have had if we had maintained these skills. So that's the first part. Second part doesn't rely on any of these predictions coming true. The second part is, okay, imagine we do live in this world of AI researchers, AI artists, AI philosophers, AI scientists, etc. What are we supposed to do? So one proposal is that this is great. This is actually a good thing. This is a utopia. We're going to live in a world in which we play games. We don't have to work. We don't have to do anything difficult or complicated. Well, we'll play complicated games. We don't have to do difficult work. We're just going to have a good time. So imagining this is the case, I'm going to imagine that people in the automated world will in fact continue to do things like philosophy and create art and do science, even though it's a bit pointless in that world. So I'm imagining a utopia of games in which people do philosophy as a game. they do philosophy, even though the AIs have already done all the work for us, or they do science, even though the AIs do it quicker and better, and so on. So I'm going to critique the supposed utopia of games. I'm going to suggest that even if humans do continue to do what looked like meaningful work in this automated world, this would be less valuable and less meaningful than the equivalent work done in a world in which AIs cannot do this work for us. So the mere presence of these AI systems, which can do all this meaningful work for us, reduces the value and meaning of that work for humans, even if we do continue to do it. Thirdly, I'm going to briefly look at some possible solutions, some that have been suggested in the literature. My proposal will be that these bad effects, or these possible bad effects on meaning in human lives, gives us some reason to slow down AI development, at least until we get to a point at which we can maybe work out a way to enhance human beings cognitively, etc., so that humans can continue to do meaningful work even in a fully automated world. Oops. Okay. So first I'll lay out some assumptions and definitions I'm going to be relying on throughout the rest of the talk. The first big assumption is that AI will develop to the point at which it equals or surpasses humans at most tasks, i.e. that we have artificial general intelligence. So we're not quite there yet, but I think recent developments over the last 3 or 4 years have made this a much more plausible outcome. So I'm not assuming that AIs are going to be super intelligent, like many times more intelligent than humans or anything like that. I'm certainly not assuming they'll be sentient or conscious, or that they'll be persons in any meaningful way. I'm just assuming here that AIs will be able to do work at the standard of an excellent human performer of that work. Of course, AIs, by their nature, can do this work more quickly than humans can. They can do it a lot more cheaply than humans can, and we can replicate AI researchers or AI artists as much as we want, right? If we want to create more human philosophers, well, that takes a while. If we want to create another AI philosopher, we just copy paste the one we already have, right? So this is my assumption about AI development. I'm also assuming, I guess this is the kind of axiological assumption, I'm assuming there is something particularly important about certain forms of meaningful human work. What I'm going to particularly focus on here is the pursuit of knowledge through scientific discovery or philosophical research, and the creation of beauty through art, music, etc. So I'm not going to defend this at all. I'm just going to assume that there is something particularly valuable about achievements in this area, and that the pursuit of these valuable things like knowledge and the creation of beauty makes a human life more meaningful. So it's a kind of connection to the true, the good, and the beautiful that makes our lives meaningful. And this is one primary way in which we do that. Okay, quick definition just to make it clear what I'm talking about and what I'm not talking about. So I'm not interested, as I said, in paid employment. I don't care whether humans get paid or don't get paid for their work in this talk. As I've said, I'm assuming UBI is a possible solution to the economic problem. So I'm going to call paid employment work one. And I'm not particularly interested in that in this talk. What I'm interested in is work two. So I'm sort of roughly defining this as the exertion of effort to attain some non-trivial goal. So the contrast here is not with unpaid employment. The contrast with work two is playing games. So playing games is going to come up quite a lot in this talk. I'll give a quick definition here, but I'll go into much more detail later. So playing games, I understand as the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles in pursuit of a goal which is trivial, like putting a ball in a net, for example. Okay. Okay, so let's get started with the possible threats to human meaningful work. First possible threat is that we might lose certain incentives to engage in difficult, time-consuming, energy-intensive forms of meaningful work. So imagine we're in this automated world. We have our AI philosophers, AI scientists, AI artists, and so on. How is this going to change our motivations or our incentives to engage in meaningful work? Well, first let's ask what actually does motivate us to engage in such work. So at least looking at my own motivation to do difficult work in philosophy, I think the key one is, well, the desire to discover new things or understand things in a way which has not been understood before. So to advance knowledge in some way. We might also think it's meaningful in itself to engage in philosophical research, to ask big questions about the universe and humanity's place in it, and so on. I would be lying if I didn't say that getting paid motivated me somewhat. If I was not getting paid at all to do philosophy, I would probably do a lot less, and I would have to go and do a different job instead. Of course, there's enjoyment. It can be very enjoyable, albeit a difficult kind of enjoyment, a strenuous form of enjoyment. And finally, I think it's a way of developing one's skills. If one is doing research in philosophy, science, etc., one is developing critical thinking skills, writing skills, imaginative skills, and so on. So I take it these, or something like these, are the kinds of incentives and motivations we have to engage in meaningful work. The question then is, would all of these incentives be as strong in this automated world I'm imagining? And I think it's pretty clear that for most of them, they would not be as strong. So taking the first one, the desire to discover new things, of course, if AIs are doing all the research much more quickly than humans can, you've seen how quickly ChatGPT can write an essay, for example. It doesn't seem like a human being can compete in this world. So if the AIs really are as good or better than humans at philosophical research, but are much more quick and are easily replicated, it doesn't seem possible anymore for us to contribute to knowledge because the AIs will get to all of the answers before we do. As for payment, I'm pretty sure my department is not going to pay me if they can just copy paste an AI instead. So that form of motivation is totally gone. Enjoyment presumably is still there. The sense of meaning, although I wonder if I would feel that my work were as meaningful if I knew that I could never make an original contribution that had not already been made by an artificial intelligence. Finally, we can still develop our skills, even if AIs do all the work for us and do it kind of better and quicker than us. We could continue doing philosophy or science or whatever, and it would develop our skills. Although it must be pointed out that the skills are no longer instrumentally useful. Since the AIs can do all this work for us, those skills that we use to do philosophical research and so on, these skills are now instrumentally useless or much less useful than they would have been. So I take it that most of these incentives have either been weakened or are absent entirely in this automated world. So if that is the case, if people have less incentive and less motivation to engage in difficult, meaningful work, it seems likely to me that they will do so to a lesser extent. If we think that there is something important either for well-being or for meaning in our lives in trying to do this difficult work, trying to ask and answer big questions and so on, then it seems as if our lives in this automated world already are threatened with becoming less meaningful, since we might no longer have the incentive to engage in this work. Okay, an obvious objection, which probably has occurred to some of you already, is that, look, humans are already outclassed by machines in some areas. So chess is a good example. Humans have been inferior to machines at chess for, I think, about 30 years now. But chess is more popular than ever. People play chess much more than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. So isn't this a refutation of what I've been saying? Well, I'm not so sure about that. I think it is true. Computers are better than us at chess, but chess is not something we do as a means to an end, right? When you play a game of chess, there is no outcome you're trying to produce. There is no state of affairs you're trying to actualize in the world. You're doing it as an end in itself. You play chess because it's fun and it's enjoyable. It's a nice way to pass the time. On the other hand, looking back at things like research and the creation of art, there is something you are trying to do. There is something you are trying to make. When I sit down and try and write a philosophy paper, it's not just because it's fun. It's because I want to get that paper out. I want to get the ideas into a form that people can read and engage with. So it seems that there is a difference here between things like chess, which are just played as an end in themselves, and things like research and the creation of art, which have an end, which could, in theory, be actualized by the AIs instead. So I don't think the chess objection is really a good objection to this. Oh, I see a lot of things in the chat. Should I be answering questions as I go, Liz, or shall I?
If you're happy, we can answer them as you go, but we can wait till the end for, I think, most of them.
Okay, maybe let's say if I'm happy for people to keep putting questions there and we can look at them at the end. But if there is like a clarifying question where I've said something incomprehensible or nonsensical, maybe raise your hand and I'll deal with that one on the fly. Okay, so so the first one was about loss of incentives or loss of motivations to engage in meaningful work. The second risk I'm interested in is that, okay, assuming I'm correct, we do have reduced incentives to do meaningful work in the automated world. It seems as if we do this meaningful work less frequently than we would have done in a non-automated world. Well, what could follow from this? One thing that I am worried about is deskilling. So loss of essential skills or really important human skills that we are no longer practicing as much as we would have done in the non-automated world. So, of course, technology de-skilling us is nothing new either. There's plenty of skills that we have lost. People don't, make barrels by hand anymore. They have machines that do it for them. People don't wind tapes back with a pen because we don't use tapes anymore and so on. So there are certain kinds of skills which technology has already, let's say, taken from us or which we've lost because of technology. Often these skills are either something trivial, like tape winding is not really a, part of the good human life, I would say. Sometimes the skills are just instrumentally useful. It's really good that someone is able to make a barrel by hand because we need barrels. But if the machine can make barrels 100 times more quickly and cheaply, then it seems as if the skill of barrel making is not quite so important. We needn't worry so much about that skill being lost. What I am worried about in the situation in which AIs can replace us in more meaningful work, like research and artistic creation, it seems as if there are more fundamental general skills, characteristic of humanity, like rationality, creativity, imagination, and so on. If we lose these skills, it seems significantly worse than losing skills that were purely instrumentally valuable. Okay, so why worry about de-skilling? Well, one reason I've already kind of suggested, if these skills really are important to living a good human life, if it's important that one develops one's rational capacities or one's creative ability or something like that, if this is part of a good human life, and we now have less incentive to practice these skills, we have less opportunity to do so, we become de-skilled or we become less skilled than we would have been in a world without automation, it seems as if to that extent we've been made somewhat worse off in this automated world. A second, more speculative risk, which I go into in much more detail in the paper, but I'm just going to quickly mention here, is the possibility of us getting kind of locked into a suboptimal future. So what do I have in mind here? There's two possible threats, which I lay out in the paper. One concerns research of any kind. So we can imagine that, as I've been suggesting, human beings get replaced by AI researchers who seem to do the work much more quickly and efficiently than we do. So we say, fine, we'll let the AIs do the work. They seem to be doing a good job. It seems possible to me that even if AIs are generally better than us at research, there might be certain directions or areas of research which might not be apparent now, but which could become apparent in the far future. There might be some risks of AIs becoming locked into sort of dead ends in research. So it might be the case, for example, that AIs are very good at extrapolating from past research and coming up with implications of things that we already know, but maybe they are less good at coming up with truly novel insights. Maybe they don't have this intuition that humans have. It might also be the case that some areas of research are going to require phenomenal consciousness. I'm assuming that AIs are just non-conscious entities. They don't have inner lives in the same way that we do. And if some developments in philosophy or science depend on phenomenal consciousness, these might also be unavailable to AI researchers. So we risk running into a dead end in research. The other possibility I'm worried about is that we might end up with what is called value lock-in. So value lock-in is a situation in which some or all of humanity's values, say moral values, become very, very difficult or even impossible to change. So my worry here is that it seems as if humanity has made huge amount of progress over the last couple of thousand years. We've gotten better and better in many ways. We've become slowly over time more moral, become less cruel, less vindictive. We've become better. I mean, if we think about what our medieval ancestors were up to, 1,000 years ago, it seems as if we're doing a lot better than we had been back then. But of course, I don't assume that we are currently perfect. I think we have many bad values today. And if you've seen my previous talks on animal ethics, a big part of that is how we treat animals and how we consider them. So we're on a sort of a path of progression morally. it seems to me that we're nowhere near the end of that path. My worry here is that if we outsource research in moral philosophy to AIs, and if we in fact lose some day-to-day moral skills because we don't, because we can depend on the machines in ways that we don't currently do, I worry that we might end up in a situation in which we maintain the current values we have for a very long time, perhaps even indefinitely. And this will be worse than the future in which we continue to develop ourselves and refine our values and improve them over time. Okay, much more on that in the paper. What time am I to finish at, Liz? At 10 past? Is that right? Or
About 5 past, that will give us
5
15 minutes for questions, but we can be a
Okay.
bit flexible.
Okay, I'll try and speed up a bit then. Okay, so much for my predictions. The second part is, okay, imagine that we do have this automated world. Contrary to all the grim predictions I've made, humans do keep doing philosophy, they keep doing art, they keep doing science for whatever reason, maybe just because they enjoy it. We can imagine then that although AIs are doing all this work for us, humans still continue to do, say, philosophy as a kind of game. I'm going to argue that the utopia of games is no utopia at all. There is a difference in value between playing games successfully and successfully doing meaningful work, such that a world in which we only play games is going to be worse for us than a world in which we do meaningful work. So the structure of this part is, first I'm going to explain what I mean by a game and show how it differs from work. I'm going to show that games are generally less valuable than meaningful work. And I'm going to explain how our displacement by artificial intelligence might turn human research or artistic creation into games. Okay, so I briefly said something about this at the beginning. What is a game? So I'm taking Bernard Suitz's definition. So for him, there are 3 essential components. First is the goal of the game. So this could be something like putting a ball in a net, or standing on a mountaintop, or traveling 42.2 kilometers as quickly as possible, something like that. Then, secondly, there are the constitutive rules of the game. So these rules are kind of what make the game fun. They forbid you from taking the most efficient means of getting to the goal. So if I want to get a ball into a net, well, the easiest thing is to pick the ball up, walk into the net, and put it down. But this would not be a very fun game. So the constitutive rules of the game make it more difficult and thereby more enjoyable by forbidding us from taking the most efficient means to the goal. Thirdly is the losery attitude, or the sort of game attitude. The player must voluntarily accept the rules of the game. So if I climb a mountain because I enjoy mountaineering, that's a game. If I climb a mountain because I left my car keys on top of the mountain and I have to go and get them, that's not a game. I'm doing it sort of begrudgingly. And finally, Danaher and Herka add an additional condition which characterizes games. They call it the triviality condition. So the goal of a game is always trivial. The world isn't made better because the ball is in the net, or the man is on the mountain, or the 42.2 kilometers has been traversed quickly. Unlike work, which aims to do meaningful work, which aims to do valuable things like create a book or create an artwork or something like that, games don't aim to do anything that is valuable or disvaluable. So the result is always something trivial. Okay, so how do games and work differ in value? So in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on the second part. So as I said, the goals of games are trivial, putting a ball in the net, while the goals of meaningful work, creating a valuable work of art or a philosophical text, these are not trivial. These are valuable, important things. So all else being equal, we should think that a life which produces intrinsically valuable things like worthwhile books or discoveries in science has gone better for that person, has been more meaningful and more valuable for that person than a life which is equally happy, has equal achievement, pleasure, desire, satisfaction, but which has not produced intrinsically valuable outcomes. So a life in which someone successfully plays games might be very nice for them. It's not quite as good as a life in which they have also produced something of intrinsic value. Okay, so how does AI turn work into games? That's kind of the essential point. So as I said, games involve the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles rather than taking the most efficient means to the goal. However, in the world of AI researchers, the most efficient means to any goal is to consult the AI. So if I want to produce a new philosophy paper on AI ethics, in the world of AI researchers, the most efficient way of doing that is to open up philosopher GPT and type in the kind of paper I want to write, and it will produce the paper for me in a few seconds. That's the most efficient way of reaching the goal. If I decide, no, I'm going to sit down and write the paper myself, it's going to take me 6 months or so of intense labor. Now I'm playing a game because I've decided not to take the most efficient means to the goal. So that's one way in which in which meaningful work has become more game-like in the automated world. The second point is that AI makes the goal of human work trivial. So if AIs have, say, already made the discoveries that I set out as a researcher to make, then there's no point in me making those discoveries, right? If my goal is to wash the dishes, but someone else has already washed them, really doesn't make sense for me to go and wash them again, right? It's a trivial thing to do. I don't make the world any better by washing the clean dishes. Likewise for creating an artwork or a piece of research. If the AIs have already done this work or could do it, in 1 second, my efforts here have become trivial or superfluous. There's no point in me engaging in this effort to produce this outcome. Okay, so I want to highlight that this is kind of a big change to what I'm calling our axiological landscape, so the value landscape in which we all live in. So first off, some routes to meaning and achievement that are currently salient, like becoming a researcher who does good work or producing a novel or something like that. These are now closed off as a way of attaining meaning because, as we've seen, they've just turned into a game. They're much less meaningful because the goal is trivial. The AI can do the work for us instantly, already has done the work. So it seems pretty pointless for me to engage in this labor to do something the machine has already done. Secondly, this is a genuine reduction in value. It's not a shift in value. It's not like it would have been the case that humans gained value and had meaningful lives by producing artworks, but now the machines have that value. I mean, the machines are not welfare subjects, the machines are not conscious, the machines are not persons. So it seems as if we've replaced ourselves as creatures that pursue the good with some other beings which are incapable of appreciating or benefiting from that good. Finally, I want to emphasize that this seems like a pervasive change. It's something that's somewhat inescapable. If these AI agents become ubiquitous, it's not like I can just say, well, I, Gary O'Brien, will never use the AI, and therefore my work will retain its meaning. All I've done by swearing not to use the AI is put a small obstacle between me and the most efficient means of attaining the goal that I was striving for. So it doesn't seem as if I can just swear off using the technology. Once the technology exists, the option to use it exists, whether I choose to use it or not. And the reduction in the meaning of my work and my labor is there, regardless of whether I choose to use or not use the machines. Okay, okay, I have another minute or two. Okay, a couple of quick possible responses. Danaher suggests that, okay, well, it is the case that we cannot have achievements in research and art as a way of attaining value and meaning in our lives in the automated world. He says, well, this was never a way for most people to gain meaning. He suggests, well, it was always just a preserve of an elite few who gained meaning in their lives through these kinds of activities. And maybe historically that has been true. It seems as if it's only been a small number of lucky people who've been able to spend their lives engaged in art or research or whatever, whereas most people have had to do sort of more laborious, instrumentally useful, but not intrinsically valuable work. I think he is correct to point that out historically. I don't know if we need to assume that that is always going to be the case in the future. If there were some way for us to selectively automate, or if there were some way for us to maintain the possibility of doing meaningful human work in the automated world, then it seems possible that most people could gain meaning in their lives in this way by doing meaningful work in the automated world. So I don't know if that works as a response. A second possibility is to say, well, look, the gains of automation outweigh the losses. So while it is true that some people will lose out in the automated world because they no longer have these routes to meaningful lives that they would have had in the non-automated world, the gains of automation are so colossal in terms of science and the economy and medical advances and reduction of suffering that the gains just dwarf the losses. So we really shouldn't worry too much about the loss of meaning in human lives because we'll have so many benefits instead. I'm also not sure about this one. I think it possibly is the case that the benefits of automation might really outweigh these harms. I'm less clear that we can just say that the reduction in the meaning of our lives can be cashed out in terms of, say, economic benefits or something like that. So while it is true that there will be colossal benefits of automation, it seems that something very important and vital might be lost in terms of pursuing a meaningful life. And we should at least acknowledge that and think about what to do about it, even if the benefits outweigh the harms. Okay, I'll skip that. Okay. Okay, I'm going to just skip right to the end then, because I've run out of time. Okay, so I don't have a solution. I shouldn't have advertised having one. I have a suggestion, which is that we ought to think about restricting or slowing down the development of these AI systems. So I've only talked about one problem here, the problem of meaning or problem of value in human lives. Of course, this is not the only risk that AIs and advancements in computer technology pose. Of course, there are existential risks to humanity, to human civilization. It might be the case, as some thinkers have thought, that AIs might at some point take over from humanity and render us extinct or something like that. There's also the possibility that we do end up creating digital sentient minds and that these sentient beings would suffer tremendously under our domination. So there are, and as I said in the outset, we haven't solved the economic problem of automation either. So my thought here is, okay, even if we don't think the problem of meaning in the automated world is enough on its own to consider slowing down or restricting AI development, combined with all these other big risks that these developments pose, it might be worth considering slowing down this development, especially if it is possible for us to develop human enhancement technology, or if we can develop human enhancement technology that allows human beings to keep up with the machines so that humans can still do meaningful work in a world that's automated, this would be the best possible outcome. We get to have the benefits of automation, at least at some point, we get the benefits of automation, automating drudgery and instrumentally valuable work and so on, but we still get to keep that section of meaningful work that is just for human beings. Of course, this is a costly solution because if we slow down AI development, we also delay all of those great benefits that we can possibly obtain from these developments. So it's a huge trade-off, and I don't know what the right answer is. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.